Okay, and welcome to part 2 of chapter 13. So where we left off, we were talking about bleeding Kansas, and just as a reminder, we were looking at the spread of slavery in the West, right? There's basically three schools of thought. One school of thought from the Southerners is that slavery should be protected wherever people want it. The Northerners, it should be eliminated wherever it doesn't exist yet. Or stopped before it exists in new places. And then lastly, there's this idea of popular sovereignty, this idea that the people there should be allowed to choose. If they want slavery, they get slavery. If they don't want slavery, they don't get slavery. But really the big thing we're going to talk about in this video, and it should be a fairly short video, is the rise of Lincoln and the Republican Party, the Dred Scott decision, and the beginning of the Civil War. So let's start with the rise of the Republican Party. So up to this point, the Democrats and the Whigs had, dominated politics. They were still under the same system with, that Van Buren had set up, where largely slavery was not the only issue. But the Republicans come in with a new issue, and you can see here that the Democrats still dominate largely. Right, there are still states that don't hold slaves that are willing to vote Democrat. But you see this new party in the North, and this is the Republican Party. Republicans come in, and they're very strongly anti-slavery. And this is the first time that that any party, any political party, took a stance as their through their platform. And that's really the challenging thing here, is that remember, under Van Buren, Van Buren had suggested that the way to avoid the problem of slavery was to make sure that neither party endorsed slavery entirely. But the Democrats had long endorsed slavery, and so the creation of this Republican Party, should be no surprise. But what you start to see is that it splits the Union. And you'll recall that these northern states tend to be more abolitionist. And as we move, the abolitionist movement will move further south into these states. The next big thing I want to talk about is the Dred Scott decision. And this is one of the major decisions of the Supreme Court. Up till now, the Supreme Court has sort of not said much about slavery. They haven't determined too much. But in 1857, a court case is brought before the Supreme Court. A slave owner brings his slave, Dred Scott, you see him pictured here, with him into Wisconsin, and holds him as a slave, right? And Dred Scott, assumes that because he's in a free state, that therefore he should be free. And the decision really comes down to the fact that Roger Taney, the lead justice of the Supreme Court, says that actually African Americans aren't even people, therefore they can't be citizens, therefore they can't have freedom, which is obviously a disastrous decision, because it supports slavery through the Supreme Court, and you see that the Supreme Court has officially taken a side. They are pro-slavery. And that Dred Scott decision is very important, because while the decision is overturned, the language of the decision is not overturned in America for many, many decades. Next big deal, Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln comes into the scene in 1858. He runs for the Senate against against Douglas, a Democrat. And they're, Stephen Douglas, the debates between the two of them are, famous debates. The big deal is that Douglas here is a supporter of popular sovereignty. And in a way, so is Lincoln. But more importantly, while Douglas says it's up to the states to decide, Lincoln says that the two should make a compromise, or that the North and the South should really come to a compromise, because more important than anything else is the unity of the nation. And that will sort of be the major issue of Lincoln's presidency when we get there. Of course, we're not quite to the election of 1860 yet, and Lincoln is not successful in, or rather, Lincoln is successful. But you can read, and I highly recommend that you read the debates on page 522, 523 in the hardcover book. I'm not sure where it is in the softcover book, but it's a Voices of Freedom section. Very good information. It's definitely something you should read. Very famous. You can buy the Lincoln Douglas debates in hardcover, and many people have read them all through. Many books have been written on them. The next big thing, John Brown. John Brown is actually from Connecticut. First thing John Brown does, John Brown believes that God has told him that America is being punished and will burn if slavery continues. He's famously one of the crazy people of American history, and often he's written off because he's crazy. But the reality is that he's a very staunch abolitionist. And one of the first things he does, right, we may remember John Brown from the Bleeding Kansas issue. He's one of the Northerners who runs off to Kansas to make sure that Kansas becomes a free state rather than a slave state. Eventually, he ends up with this idea that if the slaves just knew that there was a group in the North willing to support them, that they would, rise up and they would, defend themselves against slavery. So John Brown, his sons, and several of his followers decide to take an arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. And while it is an absolute disaster, he's captured. The Virginia militia, even the president is against it. It's sort of seen as terrorism and not supported, and it doesn't bring any slaves out of their captivity. He becomes a martyr for the abolitionists, and that's the big deal here. It's John Brown becomes the rally cry of the abolitionists as soon as the Civil War starts. There's, before the Battle Hymn of the Republic, there's the song called John Brown's Body. And it's a great little tune there. But he becomes sort of the hero of the North. He was willing to die for slavery, for a cause that he was neither guilty of, nor did he really even have a stake in, except for that he believed that it was unjust. And, he is in many ways one of the great heroes of American history, although he's also extraordinarily insane. You can see it in his eyes. All right. And what the negative effect of Harper's Ferry, or the raid on Harper's Ferry, is that it really unifies the South. Basically, the South feels that they are under attack and that their way of life is under attack, and therefore they, you see in the book calls it Southern nationalism. They start to see themselves as the real nation, the real America, and the real America has slavery, in their opinion. And this leads to a split in the Democratic Party. In the election of 1860, the Democrats cannot decide because they have one candidate, Douglas, who, as we know, is for popular sovereignty, and Breckinridge, who is very pro-slavery. And what you see happen is the Democratic Party splits, leaving the election open to Republicans and Lincoln. And even though there's the Constitutional Union Party here, which is a unique thing, right? That a third party would get this many votes. But you can see here that the Democrats and the Republicans, split the nation. There's 4 states there that are completely split. 5. You can even see there New Jersey splits halfway down the middle. But it ends up that Lincoln wins, and this is sort of the match starts the fire. The Southerners are just outraged. They begin burning Lincoln in effigy, and it just it sets things off. There's the you can read about. Let me just find it here. You'll need to read about the battle at Fort Sumter. But basically, the Southern states just declare secession. And you can see here the United States dead. Uncle Abe is a cat trying to catch the mice. The mice are the states, running away from the Union. And, it's a time of crisis. You can even see, right, that the Capitol building is still being built while Lincoln, is inaugurated. The nation is in absolute turmoil when Lincoln becomes president. The Union troops hold this fort in South Carolina. And it becomes the first battle of the Civil War, and it's really all downhill from here. So we'll talk about the Civil War in the next chapter. So that's it for chapter 13, and we'll see you for chapter 14. Go listen to John Brown's Body.